Alright, so I thought I'd do a quick video. The last night was the GOP presidential debate, and I actually watched it. I was joking on Facebook and Twitter. I said, I'm going to make a drinking game out of it, and I had certain words that I knew were going to come up in the debate. I ended up just drinking just to drink while watching it, because actually taking sips of wine or doing shots of Patron, according to the drinking game, was a little bit... I would have been unconscious after the first half hour. But it was pretty interesting. There weren't any... The biggest surprise for me was definitely that Pawlenty went after Bachmann as hard as he did. I had expected, after watching the last presidential debate, I had expected them to actually lean on Romney harder. And I didn't really see that. There were a couple of jabs. Pawlenty issued some challenge about finding something on Obama's website. I don't remember really what it was about. It was about trying to find a specific plan. I think it may have been for jobs or something. Didn't really get too concerned with that because it was mostly a stunt. But he made a jab at Romney about, the challenge was that he'd come and mow your lawn or cook you dinner, except if it was Romney, he'd only mow the first acre of Romney's house, making a jab at how kind of rich Romney is. But anyways, so instead of going after Romney, Pawlenty went on the offensive against Michelle Bachmann. He's the other Minnesotan in the race, which it was the wrong tact for him because he's so far behind in all the polls. What he needed was to come out and present himself as the reasonable-minded adult with good conservative values, and he didn't do that. He was just trying to kind of swing for Michelle Bachmann's knees, and he kind of struck her ankles, but it wasn't really enough for what he needed it to be. And sort of the big cloud hanging over the debate was Rick Perry's announcement tomorrow that he's going to be entering the race, which I think he's going to give Romney a good run for his money. Herman Cain was asked a question about, he had said something about the Mormon faith, and he said, there are some people, he's from Georgia, and he's like, there are some people who are just, they're not really on board, and I think it's a fair sentiment. I think it's fair to say that there are people who just don't really understand Mormonism, and it's kind of that kind of crazy religion that's mainstream enough that most people would be okay with, but it's kind of seen as kind of out there. So I think that is a legitimate barrier to Romney's campaign, and I think Perry kind of brings kind of this Reagan George Bush character to the race, and I think he's going to give Romney a good run for their money. And I was listening to Andrea Mitchell interviewing different pollsters and stuff today in Iowa, and really what it came down to is that they're all, other than Romney, they're all fighting for second place. And Michelle Bachmann has had a pretty good run, trying to make a dent. She may be lining herself up for a good cabinet position, but Joe Scarborough said it best this morning when he said that anybody who thinks Michelle Bachmann is going to A, win the nomination for the GOP, or B, actually win the general, is crazy. And it's true. And I think, there are a bunch of others that fall into that category who couldn't win the general just because their ideas are that far out of the mainstream. Santorum, Bachmann, Cain. I think Cain's problem I don't know. Kane has a bunch of problems. I think his biggest problem is that he's seen as perhaps too conservative on like issues involving Muslims. Newt Gingrich just kind of has the same. He's like, well, test people and make sure that they're good Americans before they get jobs in the government. Like, it was basically aimed at weeding out Muslim extremists from getting jobs in the U.S. government, and he's like, no, I'll actually apply it to everybody. Although I have a hard time seeing him excluding somebody from a position because they're an extreme Christian. There were probably my favorite question of the night was when Chris Wallace asked Michelle Bachmann. She said that she didn't want to practice tax law, but her husband Marcus told her to, and so she decided she would do tax law. I don't think she even wanted to go to law school. Anyways, basically it was he commanded her to do something or told her to do it, and she did it. And so the question was, when you're president of the United States, will you be submissive to your husband? And I think it's a valid question. Some of the candidates were talking about, like, I don't believe Sharia law should ever be used in American court. When you actually study law, courts that rely on other legal systems are so rare. They're not binding. But even references to other systems of law are so rare, and this fear in the Republican Party that somehow, a county or a circuit judge, or if you're in federal court, is going to actually say, well, according to Sharia law, this is how I'm ruling. The chances of that happening are zero. But I think it's a fair question to say, if you are such a Christian fundamentalist that you believe that women should be submissive to their husbands, there are some, and it blows people's minds sometimes, but there are conservative Christian denominations that don't let women hold positions of leadership, don't let women, have really a say in what goes on in a church. And there are people who believe that women should be submissive to their husbands. Like, literally, woman has an idea, but the husband overrides that. And I think that's a fair question. If you're voting for Michelle Bachmann for president, you're voting for her. If Marcus wants to run too, that's fantastic. But I think her statements in the past go above and beyond the whole, talking with your spouse about what's going on at work versus them giving you input into what you should do, or even having the ability to command you. I think that to me sounds like a valid argument, a valid concern. But anyways, it was awesome. At one point, Santorum was like waving and shouting, trying to get on camera. If you're a Ron Paul or a, Rick Santorum, you're having a hard time getting a whole lot of time on the screen. And I think Ron Paul always has some good things to say about foreign affairs. He's very, let's get out of other people's business. I'm not sure I agree with him on Iran. I think we need to watch Iran. They've got nukes. But he makes a good argument that why are we spending trillions of dollars to try and influence other countries? And a lot of times it's been a failed policy. And Gingrich was the surprise for me. Gingrich came away looking like this seasoned head, and he kind of made some jabs at Bachmann's position about not raising the debt ceiling at all, where he kind of said that these extreme positions aren't realistic when you're trying to govern. And I think, for me, he was the surprise. Romney really didn't say a whole lot. He kind of was just like, yeah, I'm at 30%, y'all fight. But Gingrich, for me, came away, he won't have a whole lot of traction because he's kind of seen as the old guard of the Republican Party. But for me, he came away looking, next to Romney, like the one who would have the best chance in the general. But it was a hoot and a half. especially when they got to the social issues part. And they all raised their hands when they said that they would reject a debt deal that had 10-1 spending cuts versus taxes. They said they reject that. I mean, literally, if you were to raise a tax on, the salary that inmates get when they make clothes, the Republicans would be against that because it's a tax, and that's going to ruin the economy, whether it's, millionaires and billionaires or prison workers. But anyways, it was fun. The next one's in Orlando in September.